Hi, I'm Ruth.
And I'm Darren.
Of the Rad Adventures Network.
Welcome to Convention Correspondents, where we talk about conventions we've attended and share our thoughts about the events.
Today we're talking about 221BCon, which was recently held in Atlanta, Georgia.
The convention is all about the world of Sherlock Holmes, and those of you who listen to our podcast know that we're longtime fans, and we even have a couple of Sherlock Holmes episodes that are part of our Sensational Sleuths podcast.
We're going to provide a brief history of the convention, along with talking about the many social activities at the event, as well as its sponsors, and what the vendor's room is like.
Then we'll spend time talking about some of the many excellent panels presented at this year's event.
Convention Correspondents is part of the Rad Adventures Network.
If you enjoy the show, please consider checking out our other shows that are available through most podcast apps, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Amazon Music, as well as YouTube.
Trekker Talk covers the adventures of 23rd century bounty hunter Mercy St. Clair from the sci-fi comic Trekker by writer and artist Ron Randall.
Xenozoic Xenophiles follows the adventures of Xenozoic Tales, featuring Cadillacs and Dinosaurs by writer and artist Mark Schultz.
And Warlord Worlds is devoted to the comic creations of writer and artist Mike Grell, including the Warlord, John Sable, and Green Arrow.
Thank you all for listening, and we'll be back with our thoughts about 221BCon right after this promo for another podcast you might enjoy.
Hi, I'm Mike Garvey. You might remember me from podcasts such as Waiting for Doom, DCOTD, or The Gary Show. And I've made a terrible decision. I've started a podcast where I read detective comics, one issue at a time, across 80 plus years, on purpose. It's called The Detective Phase. If you like comics, historical deep dives, or listening to a grown adult lovingly explain why stories from as far back as 1939 still matter, this show is absolutely for you. And if you've ever loved Batman and thought, what if someone took this way too seriously? The Detective Phase has you covered. New episodes twice a month, wherever you get your podcasts, on the Waiting for Doom feed, or at waitingfordoom.com. Therapy pending. I heard that Dr. Herkenstefner might be available.
221BCon is an annual convention dedicated to all things Sherlock Holmes that is held in Atlanta, Georgia each year. The first 221BCon was in 2013, and it's been held every year since then, except for 2020, and the 2021 event was held online. The convention grew out of the explosion of interest in the very popular BBC series Sherlock, and its appeal to women and the LGBTQ+ communities. Crystal Knoll, Heather Holloway, Taylor Bloomberg, Kathy Dodds, and Liz Arnold were the founders, and became known as the Beekeepers, while attendees are known as Bees, and the con is called the Hive.
All are great Sherlock Holmes references that fans will quickly understand.
The original founders stepped down in 2025, and longtime attendees Johanna Draper Carlson and Heather Henson took over the convention, with the original directors now serving as advisors.
The convention is very welcoming to all and prides itself on diversity and inclusion, with panels and events that appeal to women and the LGBTQ+ community. The convention brings in several hundred attendees each year and features panels and events for all fans, from those who are new to the fandom and want an introduction to the world of the great detective, to those who are interested in the latest television adaptations, to those who want more academic discussions. The convention prides itself for covering everything from Basil Rathbone to Basil of Baker Street, and everything in between. So there truly is something for everyone at 221BCon, with attendees who range from 8 to 88.
Prior to the first 221BCon, the founders promoted the event at DragonCon in Atlanta. DragonCon is a huge pop culture convention held during Labor Day weekend each year, and we've attended it many times. And we were actually at DragonCon that year, which helped us know about this convention from the start.
As lifelong fans of Sherlock Holmes, we'd hoped to attend 221BCon from the very beginning, but our work schedules often made traveling in April difficult, so we have only been able to attend the convention in recent years after our work schedules changed.
We are very happy we've been able to make it an annual tradition in recent years.
The convention has a few wonderful sponsors who give it a little boost of support to help it continue and be successful.
Belanger Books is one of the world's leading publishers of Sherlock Holmes books, offering collections of the original stories with added essays and insightful analysis, as well as pastiches of new stories. One of their most ambitious projects is Sherlock Holmes, A Year of Mystery. Each book features 12 new stories, one for each month for each year that Sherlock Holmes worked as a detective, beginning with 1881. Other collections include Sherlock Holmes and the Great Lady Detectives, as well as Sherlock Holmes horror stories and Gaslight Ghouls, and holiday mysteries in Sherlock Holmes Crimes for Christmas. In addition to Sherlock Holmes, Belanger Books publishes other mystery and horror collections, including the Solar Ponds books that we'll talk about later.
Award-winning playwright Ken Ludwig, whose works have been performed on Broadway and around the world, is a sponsor of the convention. He has written a wide variety of plays, including Crazy for You and Lend Me a Tenor, along with adaptations like Murder on the Orient Express, Sherwood, and The Three Musketeers. His Sherlock Holmes plays are very popular, including Baskerville, Moriarty, and The Games Afoot, and we've been lucky to see all of those on stage. Ken's business partner, Ashley Polasek, is a regular guest at 221 BCon and participates in several panels during the weekend.
Husband and wife Curtis Armstrong and Elaine Aronson are also sponsors. Elaine is a producer and writer known for TV shows including Sybil, That 80s Show, Roseanne, The Gilded Age, and more. Curtis is an actor known for Supernatural, Moonlighting, Better Off Dead, Risky Business, and Revenge of the Nerds, as well as the Moriarty audio series from Audible. Curtis is a regular guest at 221 BCon and attends many panels throughout the weekend, where he often sits in the front row and asks insightful questions.
The convention features a nice variety of vendors with great merchandise for Sherlockians. The dealer's room even includes an auction table where fans can bid on unique, homemade, and out-of-print items throughout the weekend.
In addition to being a sponsor, Belanger Books also has a table in the dealer's room selling their many wonderful books. We always enjoy chatting with Brian and Derek Belanger and have found we have many interests in common beyond Sherlock Holmes, from classic television shows to travel to the Girl Genius comics by Phil Folio. We brought a couple of Sherlock Holmes books with us that we had gotten through recent Kickstarter campaigns and got those signed, and we also bought a couple of new books while we were there. You can check out all of their great collections at belangerbooks.com.
Brett Herholtz is a fantastic artist whose style is similar to Edward Gorey, who did the animated opening for the PBS series Mystery. He does original art commissions and comics based on Sherlock Holmes and Doctor Who. We have several of his books, including his wonderful comic adaptation of the classic Sherlock Holmes silent film with William Gillette, as well as some of his Doctor Who comics. At 221 BCon, we picked up a couple of amazing original commissions from him, including one of Holmes and Watson, and another that featured Basil of Baker Street, who some of you will know from Disney's movie The Great Mouse Detective.
Jeff Ryder, who writes the comic book series Major Holmes and Captain Watson, was also at the con. Set in 1914, the series follows Sheffield Holmes, the nephew of the great detective, who teams up with the mysterious American Imogen Watson in the Special Intelligence Service. We picked up all of the current issues from Jeff at the con, and you can find the comics and more information at cloudwranglercomics.com.
Thomas Pugh writes the Holmes Undead comic, which blends mystery with gothic horror. Surviving the confrontation at Reichenbach Falls, Sherlock Holmes emerges changed after being infected by his immortal nemesis, Professor Moriarty, who, it turns out, is a vampire. We picked up this intriguing title at the con, and you can find more information about it at holmesundead.com.
BCon features lots of social activities during the weekend, including a swap meet, trivia game, karaoke, and a dance. In addition, attendees can be found hanging out and chatting in the hotel's restaurant and bar throughout the weekend. The food truck, which is spelled with a U and an umlaut instead of two O's, is a fun inside joke at the con, and another great place to hang out and chat while getting a delicious meal.
Lots of attendees are in cosplay throughout the weekend, and the convention has a specifically scheduled cosplay exhibition to give everyone a chance to see the best cosplay from the event.
At this year's event, we saw several different iterations of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, as well as Mycroft, and even the Great Mouse Detective.
Shipping, which originates from the word relationship, has been part of 221BCon from the beginning. Shipping is all about fans pairing different characters together who may not be traditionally or officially partnered in the original stories or adaptations. Shipping grew in popularity among fans of Star Trek the original series, with a subgenre of slash fiction, with fans often partnering Kirk/Spock and also sometimes called Spirk, and shipping has become even more popular in fandom in recent years. The practice even dates back to the original Sherlock Holmes stories, with fans of the time writing new stories partnering themselves with Sherlock Holmes. There were 2 panels during the weekend that were focused on shipping. Sherlolly, for fans who partner Sherlock Holmes and Molly Hooper from BBC's Sherlock, and Johnlock, for fans who partner John Watson and Sherlock Holmes.
Now let's turn our attention to the terrific discussion panels at 221BCon. The convention has 4 tracks of programming throughout the weekend, with 2 small rooms, 1 medium-sized room, and 1 large room for discussion panels.
So there are always great panels going on. We try to attend as many as we can together, but sometimes there are 2 interesting panels at the very same time, and we have to split up and then tell each other about the panels afterwards.
The convention weekend kicks off on Friday evening with a welcome panel to introduce the directors of the event and provide general information about the weekend. The welcome panel is usually followed by an orientation panel for new attendees to help them get the most out of the weekend. The convention wraps up late on Sunday afternoon with The Last Bow, another Sherlock Holmes reference. It's to thank attendees, wish everyone safe travels home, and encourage everyone to return for the next year's event.
There are often panels at the convention related to film, television, and audio adaptations of Sherlock Holmes. This is especially true for any new or currently running shows, and there are occasionally panels dedicated to older shows and classic adaptations.
This year featured a roundtable discussion about the latest series, Young Sherlock, on Amazon Prime Video. Most fans liked seeing Guy Ritchie return to the franchise and enjoy the fast-paced action in the series. The consensus was that everyone's favorite character was Moriarty. Meanwhile, there were very different opinions about Sherlock and Mycroft, with some appreciating the new takes on the characters, while others felt the portrayal strayed too far from canon. There was also discussion of the differing approaches to bringing a sister into the storyline in this new series compared to how it was done in the BBC's Sherlock.
Though not a Sherlock Holmes series, this year's convention featured a panel on the new series Bookish. The mystery series is set in post-World War II London with Gabriel Book, who is the owner of Books, helping the police solve crimes. This series is created by and stars Mark Gatiss, who fans will know as the co-creator of the BBC's Sherlock, in which he also plays Mycroft.
Last year's panel about the CBS series Watson was optimistic and filled with enthusiasm. This year's roundtable discussion was more somber, with most fans disappointed about the recent cancellation of the series. Fans expressed overall enjoyment of the show, but felt it lost direction at times and didn't always seem to know where it was going. However, they still liked it overall, and most fans agreed that Shinwell was their favorite character in the show.
Like most of the fans there, we're very disappointed that Watson has been canceled. We will miss it.
There was a panel for the series Sherlock and Daughter last year, but since the second season had not yet aired, there wasn't a panel for the series at this year's con.
This year's convention featured a sneak peek screening of the new short film, My Dear Watson. The light-hearted comedy features a teenaged Holmes who receives a mysterious love note and works with his schoolmate Watson to uncover the identity of his secret admirer. The film has been accepted into competition at several film festivals this year. You can find the movie on social media where you can follow its progress at those film festivals.
Actor and Sherlockian Curtis Armstrong hosted a screening of the classic 1971 comedy They Might Be Giants with George C. Scott and Joanne Woodward. He talked about becoming an instant fan after seeing the movie in the cinema when it was first released. He also explained that the marketing and advertising at the time hid the connection to Sherlock Holmes following the poor box office performance of Billy Wilder's film The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes that was released the prior year. Of course, both films are now considered classics and loved by fans, including us.
The Atlanta Radio Theater Company performs live audio dramas and does classic radio series reenactments at a wide variety of events, including DragonCon. Adaptations they've done include the works of H.G. Wells, H.P. Lovecraft, Robert Louis Stevenson, and Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes. In addition to live performances, they have a podcast that includes new material, fan favorites, and rare performances. At 221 Beacon, the group recreated a classic radio broadcast of A Scandal in Bohemia, including the commercials for Petri wine that were part of the original broadcast. And they also presented an original production of Lady Sherlock, The Games Afoot.
Sherlock & Co. is an audio drama series that is currently very popular with fans. The series adapts Arthur Conan Doyle's original stories in modern times, with Dr. John Watson as a true crime podcaster documenting his life with Sherlock Holmes. The series is known for being witty and immersive and occasionally dark. 221 Beacon often has members of the UK cast or production team from Sherlock & Co. as remote guests through video chat panels.
Historical panels are another favorite category at the convention and cover a wide variety of topics. Scotland Yard through the years featured a prosecutor as a panelist and discussed the history of the organization. Formed in 1829, the public was initially resistant, not trusting the organization and comparing them to spies. Originally, there was no universally accepted ID system, and police departments used a variety of time-consuming and complicated methods, including measuring ears and fingers. Criminals were very resistant when photography for mugshots was introduced in the mid-1800s. Many would kick and fight, trying to prevent their photos from being taken. Despite challenges in identification and forensics, they discussed how impressive it was for Scotland Yard to catch the Lambeth poisoner in 1892. He was a doctor who murdered 10 patients in 3 countries. It took Scotland Yard several years before they were confident enough in the fingerprint system to adopt it in 1901.
The panel also discussed that Inspector Lestrade is an enduring character from the canon, and one of the most frequently used characters in pastiches, along with Irene Adler and Moriarty. The discussion even included the different pronunciations of the inspector's name. Lestrade would be closest to the French pronunciation where the name originated, though Arthur Conan Doyle preferred the pronunciation Lestrade with a long A sound, which was used in the Jeremy Brett television series. They also took time to discuss Inspector Gregson and that many fans like that character who was featured in the television series Elementary.
Mrs. Hudson's Kitchen was hosted by 2 librarians who discussed Victorian homes, kitchens, and cooking techniques. They recommended the books Mrs. Beeton's Victorian Cookbook as well as Dining with Sherlock Holmes. Landladies like Mrs. Hudson worked very long hours and were often awake before their tenants and worked 12 to 14 hours a day. Maids were often from orphanages or from middle-class families who just wanted their daughters to learn to be better housewives. Cooks had to be able to prepare hearty and filling dishes, as well as seasonal, local, and foreign cuisine. There were no supermarkets, so shopping required stops at several small shops and vendors that took more time. During Victorian time, London was a large international port, and thriving trade routes made imported goods from around the world accessible, including spices and rice from South Asia. Lamb and mutton were even shipped in from New Zealand by the 1880s, following advances in refrigeration.
Cooks of the time had lots of practical knowledge of chemistry, which was needed for food storage, cooking, and cleaning, which could be difficult and where mistakes were expensive. For instance, cooks needed to be able to detect if chalk had been deceptively mixed into the flour they bought, so they could adjust recipes accordingly. The panelists discussed what it was like to cook with coal stoves and how difficult it was to clean homes that used coal for heat. For instance, hot water and soap were needed to get rid of soot, while wood ash could usually be brushed away or wiped up with cold water. The scullery, or back kitchen, was hidden away and was used for messy tasks like cleaning, washing, and preparing food ingredients prior to cooking. Most homes had to heat their water on the stoves in the kitchen and then carry it upstairs for bathing. Also, while the understanding of germ theory began to grow in the 1870s, it did not immediately lead to changing behavior. So food safety standards like washing hands with soap or keeping leftovers cool were not standard at the time.
Jason Merrill of Blackbird Finery, which specializes in vintage menswear accessories for classy cosplay, often does a presentation about 19th century soda fountains. It's a favorite of attendees who can sample the sodas he makes during the panel, and he provides copies of recipes so you can try making them at home. The panel is definitely a favorite of mine. You can find Jason Merrill on social media and on YouTube and at blackbirdfinery.com.
There are always several panels during the weekend about topics taken directly from the canon of the original stories by Arthur Conan Doyle. At the Crimes of Sherlock Holmes panel, an attorney took examples from several of the original stories and presented arguments for and against convicting the great detective, and the audience had to vote guilty or not guilty for each charge. It was a very interesting panel with lots of enthusiastic participation from the attendees. Examples included simple battery from the man with the twisted lip, breaking and entering from the Speckled Band and Charles Augustus Milverton, filing a false police report from the 5 Orange Pips, preventing the lawful burial of a body from Lady Frances Carfax, destruction of property from the problem of Thor Bridge, threats to kill from Lady Frances Carfax and the 3 Garridebs, and most common, accessory after the fact, from the Boscombe Valley Mystery, the Blue Carbuncle, Charles Augustus Milverton, the Abbey Grange, the Devil's Foot, and the Second Stain.
The panel on Women in the Canon explained that Arthur Conan Doyle was himself a study in contradictions, who was progressive in some ways, including education and legal reform for women, while at the same time being against voting rights for women. In the Sherlock Holmes stories, he wrote about strong and independent women who could outsmart men in some stories, but wrote more traditional female stereotypes in other stories. The great detective himself is often remembered for being suspicious of and condescending toward women, but the panelists discussed that in many ways Sherlock Holmes treats women much better and with more respect than most men in Victorian society would have done at the time. Characters discussed included Irene Adler, Mrs. Hudson, Kitty Winter, Mrs. Ferguson, Beryl Stapleton, Maud Bellamy, and the many Violets. The panel recommended several resources for fans, including the Irene Adler books by Carol Nelson Douglas, the Scotland Yarders books by Marcia Wilson, and the Sherlock Monthly podcast.
Brad Kiefauer and Max McGee hosted a panel on Sherlock Holmes chronology by showing the process through examples of several stories. Some stories seem clear, with dates specifically mentioned, while the dates have to be estimated in other stories based on things mentioned in the stories. However, even stories that provide dates aren't always clear, because sometimes references within the stories are inconsistent. For instance, dates sometimes don't match the correct day of the week, while some have dates where the seasons described don't match the dates. It all creates a fun process for chronologists. They used examples from 12 different stories, including A Scandal in Bohemia, The Red-Headed League, A Case of Identity, The Blue Carbuncle, The Speckled Band, The Noble Bachelor, The Copper Beeches, and more.
Ashley Polasek and Curtis Armstrong always host a fun panel filled with laughs in which they take a unique and humorous look at something from Sherlock Holmes' canon. Examples include topics like last year's Women in the Canon and this year's Toxic Men in the Canon. It's always good fun and is like watching a classic comedy duo like Laurel and Hardy or George Burns and Gracie Allen.
While most of the panels at 221BCon focus on the great detective and the world around him, there are frequently discussion panels that we would call Sherlock Holmes adjacent. These are usually topics that would still interest Sherlock Holmes fans, and we always enjoy them.
The Raffles and Bunny stories are by E.W. Hornig, who was the brother-in-law of Arthur Conan Doyle. The stories are clearly inspired by Sherlock Holmes, but instead of a great detective, A.J. Raffles is a gentleman thief, and his friend, Buddy Manders, chronicles his adventures. The stories were dedicated to Arthur Conan Doyle with a message of affectionate flattery and mockery. The panel discussed the stories as well as the various adaptations, including the 1939 movie with David Niven and the well-regarded 1970s television series.
The Solar Ponds discussion was another fun panel. Upon learning there would be no further Sherlock Holmes stories, 19-year-old fan August Derleth wrote to Arthur Conan Doyle to ask if he could continue the series. After receiving a gracious no in reply to his request, he proceeded to create his own London detective, who he named Solar Ponds, and who is known as the Sherlock Holmes of Prayed Street. Derek Belanger and Max McGee discussed the new editions of the long out-of-print Solar Ponds stories that Belanger Books has published, along with collections of new stories they are publishing. I read the fun Solar Ponds stories growing up, and I'm very excited about these new editions, and I immediately pledged for the latest Kickstarter campaign.
Jane Austen's Detective Heroines was a fun panel that asked fans to identify which Jane Austen characters would make the best detectives. The attendees came up with great suggestions, including Catherine Morland from Northanger Abbey, Emma Woodhouse from Emma, and Charlotte Lucas from Pride and Prejudice. The group particularly liked the idea of Mary Crawford and Fanny Price from Mansfield Park as a team like Holmes and Watson. The group thought Margaret Dashwood from Sense and Sensibility would be a fun character in stories similar to Enola Holmes. And the group thought Nurse Rook from Persuasion would work in stories similar to the Nero Wolfe books, where she could be the Archie Goodwin type character who goes out and investigates for a detective who stays at home.
A nice panel to end on was the discussion of the supernatural stories of Arthur Conan Doyle. Sherlock Holmes stories discussed included The Hound of the Baskervilles, The Creeping Man, The Sussex Vampire, and The Devil's Foot. However, the majority of the panel focused on Doyle's suspense stories that don't feature Sherlock Holmes, including classics like The Horror of the Heights, The Parasite, and The Captain of the Pole Star. The consensus was that his best supernatural story is Lot 249, which coincidentally was adapted by Sherlock and Bookish star Mark Gatiss for the BBC in 2023 for the series A Ghost Story for Christmas.
And with that, we'll close out our discussion of 221BCon.
We hope you've enjoyed hearing our thoughts about the convention.
If you're in the Atlanta area, or if you're a big fan like us, we highly recommend this event for Sherlock Holmes fans.
Thank you all for listening, and we'll be right back with our wrap-up and contact information.
For more than 60 years, Dr. Victor Von Doom has been portrayed in comic books as a villain. But one podcast has been brave enough to challenge this narrative and present the man as the misunderstood anti-hero he truly is. I'm Professor Allen, and the podcast is Doom Speak. On the show, we present a more balanced view of Marvel's most maligned monarch. Over the years, we've covered his adventures in titles such as Iron Man, Doom 2099, Astonishing Tales, Silver Sable, and occasionally the title dedicated to his most persistent antagonists, Fantastic Four. If you believe that there's more behind the man behind the mask than the fake news at Big Comic wants you to think, then Doomspeak may be the podcast for you. Doomspeak can be found on all major podcast platforms as a part of the Relatively Geeky network feed and at relativelygeekypodcast.blogspot.com. Give the show a listen. And hail Doom!
Before we go, we want to provide our contact information.
You can write to us directly at radadventuresnetwork@gmail.com or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky under the name Rad Adventures Network.
You can listen to the show through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and most other podcast apps.
You can also find the show on YouTube as part of the Rad Adventures Network.
That's RAD, R-A-D, which is short for Ruth and Darren.
And you can always visit radadventuresnetwork.com, where you'll find all of the episodes of all of our podcasts, including our main shows Trekker Talk, Warlord Worlds, and Xenozoic Xenophiles, as well as our other podcasts including Sensational Sleuths, Super Secret Spies, Continental Comics, and more.
If you like the show, please consider leaving a review. While you won't find a specific place to review Convention Correspondents, we hope you'll leave a review under Rad Adventures Network. Every review helps the podcast be more likely to show up in search results.
And on YouTube, we hope you'll subscribe to the channel and give us some likes on the videos.
Thanks for listening, and we hope you'll come back next time for another new episode of Convention Correspondents.
Rad Adventures Network is a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. For more information, please visit comicspodcast.com. The theme music is Typewriter Symphonic and is licensed from pod5.com. We make no money from this podcast and no copyright infringement is intended.